Before question period, I'd like to remind members that Rule 20 Sub 2 requires that questions must be related to matters within the responsibility of government or matters related to individual ministerial authority. Also pursuant to Rule 20 Sub 3, responses shall be relevant to the question. If questions contain extra matters in the preamble, this invites responses to the additional matters. Ministers may decline to answer, take notice, or respond as they see fit, provided they are in order and deal with the topic raised. Question period. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver when it comes to economic growth and fiscal management. Bank of Montreal's most recent economic forecast for Saskatchewan forecasts economic growth at just over 1% for 2023 and less than 1% for 2024. Under this Premier's watch, in 3 of the past 5 years, the Saskatchewan's economy has actually shrunk. And over the past 5 years, the average annual economic growth has been at only 0.36% per year. When will this government admit that its economic strategy isn't working and finally listen to the people of this province on how to grow this economy?
Recognize the Premier.
The Leader of the Opposition is referencing one of the more recent reports of Bank of Montreal economic report for the provinces across Canada. I think if she reads on, she'll see that that report identifies Saskatchewan as leading the country in economic growth, Mr. Speaker. Right. That's where this province is in report after report, not only for this year but out into next year, Mr. Speaker. We're an export-based province. And this is a government that has focused on representing the Saskatchewan companies that are exporting to over 150 countries around the world, Mr. Speaker. For an example, next week we will be in Dubai, allowing Saskatchewan companies to tell their story, not only of what they produce, but how they produce the products that they do, some of the most sustainable products on earth, Mr. Speaker. What this has resulted in, this concerted effort, Mr. Speaker, of providing the cleanest and most affordable food, fuel and fertilizer to countries around the world, Mr. Speaker, has provided us with about a 40% increase on our export value this past year, a record, Mr. Speaker, in Saskatchewan's history, building on last year's export value, which was also a record.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier doesn't like that report. I've got another one for him. The release of the mid-year financial report today confirms that once again this government has mismanaged our public finances. This Premier's record is now 5 deficits to 1 surplus, even though he promised balanced budgets. Right. We've gone from a $1 billion surplus to a $250 million deficit, all while this tired and out-of-touch government continues to waste public tax dollars hand over fist. A $1 million pavilion in Dubai, hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on the Ames and Link-In systems, and inflated hotel fees in the Ministry of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, wasting public tax dollars is always a bad idea. How does this Premier justify it while he's also running a deficit?
Recognize the Premier.
With respect to the fiscal report that was provided today by our Deputy Premier, the Minister of Finance, there's 4 large figures, 4 areas where the revenues and expenses on behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan have changed. First is firefighting, Mr. Speaker, was up over what is an average year, which is what we budget for. Second is the teachers' pension plan, also up, Mr. Speaker, an accounting number. Most certainly, Mr. Speaker, potash royalties have changed. Potash royalties that the members opposite were banking on, Mr. Speaker, with the multiple commitments that they had made, Mr. Speaker, a total of about $2.7 billion worth of commitments, Mr. Speaker. But largely, Mr. Speaker, we continue to have, for the second and in some areas third year, a drought in the southwestern portion of this province, Mr. Speaker. $853 million prepaid dollars, Mr. Speaker, within the crop insurance fund was provided to farmers in this province, Mr. Speaker. That needs to be accounted for. Mr. Speaker, the question that I have is that this is a government that is following the crop insurance regulations that we have and providing those dollars to farmers. Mr. Speaker, would the members opposite not support farmers, not provide that $853 million, Mr. Speaker, like they did with the GRIP contracts a couple of decades ago?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, you can tell how desperate that Premier is by how many decades he reaches back for his response. Now, this tired and out-of-touch government continues to mismanage our provincial finances. Taxpayer-supported debt is now going to increase, Mr. Speaker, by $800 million this year, all while this Premier sticks to the line that he's paying down $1 billion in debt. Mr. Speaker, it's a shell game. It states right in their own mid-year report that the taxpayer-supported debt is increasing by $800 million. Will that Premier come clean and admit that total government debt has now reached its highest level in the history of this province, over $30 billion? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last 2 years, it has been this government, Mr. Speaker, that paid down $2.5 billion in debt in the province of Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. $2.5 billion this government paid down versus day after day in this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, members opposite standing up and calling for the government to spend that, what do they call it, record windfall dollars, Mr. Speaker. Spend that record windfall dollars here. Spend that record windfall dollars there, Mr. Speaker, to the tune of $2.7 billion, Mr. Speaker. $2.5 billion paid down on the deficit, saving us over $100 million annually in interest, Mr. Speaker. Under the NDP, we would still have that $100 million annually in interest. We'd have to rewrite that at today's rates, which have tripled, Mr. Speaker, and we would have baked that $2.7 billion in year after year after year, Mr. Speaker. That's the record of the NDP when they're in government. That's the record of what the NDP would do if they ever got back into government, Mr. Speaker, versus a province today that has the second lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the nation of Canada.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
You know, that tax and squander Premier just needs to open up page 11 of his report, and the graph will make it simple. The debt, Mr. Speaker, is going like this, Mr. Speaker. You know, when the budget was released in March, many shared concerns with respect to the revenue forecast for potash. Here we are only 6 months later, and now we find that this finance minister and that Premier was off by 40%. This tired and out-of-touch government projected a $1 billion surplus. Now it's a $250 million deficit. After being so dramatically wrong on the budget, once again, they want us to trust them with their plan to create a costly Saskatchewan revenue agency. A costly and bureaucratic plan to put this government in charge of collecting corporate taxes, all while costing tens of millions of dollars more for taxpayers and local businesses in Saskatchewan. With their tax and squander record of mismanaging the budget, why should Saskatchewan people trust them on collecting corporate?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Well, rather than explain all of the spending that the NDP have asked for and how they're going to actually find the money for it, they want to talk about a revenue agency that isn't even in this budget. We are having the consultation process. They put a price tag on it. It's their price tag. It's not ours. But that is how desperate they are to find something that they want to cut when it's not even there to cut, Mr. Speaker. I want them to explain why they call the crop insurance, where we stand payout, that we stand up for producers, why they call that mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. Would they not stand up for our producers? Why do they criticize the potash projections when he knows full well we get that from the industry? The industry does our projections. Is he saying that they're mismanaging their money, that they're irresponsible, Mr. Speaker? He knows where we get our information.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
You know, Mr. Speaker, that tax and squander government knows full well that we've been calling for tax relief, Mr. Speaker. Not more and more taxes and hurting our economies and households. The budget materials released today also confirm what the public already knows. The job creation rate in Saskatchewan is well below the Canadian average. The Canadian average rate by more than 40%. We're less that rate by 40%. Our inflation rate is higher than that of Canada and made so much worse by the actions of this government, the taxes and the utility rate hikes that they've imposed on Saskatchewan people. Saskatchewan had the highest increase in electrical rates year to year from 2022 to this last year, according to Statistics Canada. When will this government wake up to the reality that their mismanagement and choices are driving up inflation and the cost of living for hard-working Saskatchewan families?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, a lot in that question, Mr. Speaker, but let's start with jobs. The lowest unemployment rate in the entire country is here in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. 19,000 jobs created last year alone, Mr. Speaker. The unemployment rate at 4.4%. The national rate, Mr. Speaker, is at 5.7%. And today, Mr. Speaker, a really exciting announcement to keep that momentum going. $80 million contribution to the Saskatchewan Research Council, an investment in a microreactor project that could have profound benefits for this province and around the world. And what do we hear from the NDP, Mr. Speaker? Criticism, saying you should never do that, Mr. Speaker. We believe that they're wrong on that project, just like we know they're wrong on jobs, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
The question wasn't answered, just a whole bunch of spin from the minister. The question that is always asked at a time like this is, could our present financial situation, could it have been avoided? The answer, of course, is yes, if this government would quit its waste and mismanagement, quit the extravagant travel around the world with a cool $1 million on a pavilion in Dubai, quit the mismanagement of IT projects and their runaway costs, quit wasting on their costly projects like the Marshals and the Sask Revenue Agency, quit the billions on mismanaged and outsourced projects like the bypass and the GTH land scandal. The list really goes on and on. Instead of driving up debt and driving up costs for Saskatchewan people, why won't the Sask Party just quit mismanaging the hard-earned dollars of Saskatchewan people?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Again, very interesting that the NDP make a list of one-time spend, which is capital expenditures, and they would bake it into ongoing operating costs, Mr. Speaker. That's the point we've been making. You cannot take one-time revenue and bake it into ongoing operating costs. Exactly. Those members opposite would have us go back to a paper system, filing cabinets of children in our care. That is what is irresponsible. They would not have put in an IT system because there was none in place when the NDP were in power. It was paper files and paper filing cabinets. We could track a library book better when the NDP were in power than we could track our children in care. Somehow they have magical free IT systems. They would be doing payroll by hand, Mr. Speaker, without having an IT system. That's what will take us right back to the days of the NDP.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is wasting dollars hand over fist, dollars that should be going to health care and education. Unfortunately, we see that every day in our hospitals with the over-reliance on contract nurses, because that has allowed chronic short staffing to become the norm. Contract nurses have to be brought in to fill the gaps. These nurses cost way more per hour than actually employing regular full-time nurses. It makes no sense. And nurses tell me it's costing our province $100 million a year. Why is this government wasting so much money in this way? Why not just hire more registered nurses?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to begin by thanking all of our healthcare workers, thanking our nurses that are working across this province and our major centres and our rural and remote communities as well, Mr. Speaker, to take care of residents right across this province, Mr. Speaker. And I would say this, we in Saskatchewan and other provinces as well utilize contract nurses when necessary to make sure that we can keep services operating as they should, Mr. Speaker. But ultimately, what we are working to do, Mr. Speaker, is to hire more nurses, bring more nurses and other healthcare workers into our healthcare system, such as I described earlier this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, how since December of last year, we have hired 870 new nursing graduates that are coming into our hospitals and our long-term care facilities right across this province, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to do that, to train nurses here in Saskatchewan, to work in Saskatchewan facilities, to continue to build upon and enhance the healthcare that we have right across this province, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, there's a time and a place for these stopgap measures, but the fact is that under this tired and out-of-touch government, these measures are becoming the norm. Nurses today are protesting outside of St. Paul's Hospital, calling for action to end the chronic short staffing, to end the fire code violations for overcrowding, and to start treating healthcare workers with the respect that they deserve. When will we see some action? When will we see an end to the chronic short staffing in Saskatchewan hospitals?
Recognize the Health Minister.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nearly 18,000 nurses of all designations call Saskatchewan home, Mr. Speaker, and some of them are here, joined us here today. Saskatchewan-trained healthcare workers and nurses, and those that have come from outside of our borders as well, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier today, we have had a significant number of nurses come from other countries, such as the Philippines, Mr. Speaker, where, as I said earlier, we now have 410 offers of support that have been extended to Filipino nurses as part of last fall's recruitment mission, Mr. Speaker. 185 are currently enrolled in training, and 90 of those have arrived and are participating in their clinical portions of their training right now, Mr. Speaker, and will be working in healthcare facilities right across this province once they are licensed, Mr. Speaker. This is how we are continuing to build upon what it is that we are doing for healthcare in this province as part of our 4-point action plan to recruit, train, incentivize, and retain healthcare workers as announced in September of last year, Mr. Speaker, with significant success, acknowledging that we still have challenges to address. We're committed to addressing those challenges.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, day after day the minister gets up and acts like he's got everything under control. The fact is, if this government had anything under control, we wouldn't have healthcare workers protesting outside hospitals today. And we wouldn't have doctors. We wouldn't have doctors going out to Twitter to tell us it's taking 6 months for patients to get booked for a mammogram. And we wouldn't have fire code violations in our emergency rooms. And we wouldn't have more than 1,000 times when no ambulance was available when someone called for one. This is the record of this tired and out-of-touch government on health care. When will the Sask Party take any responsibility for the failures that they've caused in our health system?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government takes very seriously the investments here we're making into health care in this province. Provinces right across Canada, Mr. Speaker, are facing challenges in that regard, which is why, Mr. Speaker, we have made significant investments into health care recruitment and retention, and also training to bring more staff into our facilities, Mr. Speaker, to also increase capacity in our facilities, physical capacity, adding more beds, more hospitals, more long-term care facilities, Mr. Speaker, that we are continuing to invest in to make sure that we have this capacity built into our system, not only to address the pressures we face today, but also to build into the future to make sure that we're having more beds available. Mr. Speaker, and with respect to some of the pressures that we're facing right now when it comes to wait times for breast cancer biopsies and diagnostics, we'll be making an announcement a little bit later this week on some short-term measures to address those wait lists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is failing spectacularly on the housing file from beginning to end. And while serious questions have been raised about inflated rates at hotels paid out to government MLA-owned hotels, There's still the matter of the $600 million this government is wasting on the vacant housing across this province, and the nearly $200 million on wasted utilities, foregone rent, and taxes on those empty units. Homelessness has hit a shameless high water mark in all of our communities. Meanwhile, vacancy rates have jumped from 6% in 2012 to 18% 10 years later in 2022. The increase in seniors' vacancies during that time up over 1,000%. Mr. Speaker, this government has cut funding to public housing to the tune of hundreds of millions, and it's seniors who are getting a raw deal. What does the minister say to seniors who say they can't count on public housing as a safe and affordable option for them anymore?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we've been over this before in terms of the $600 million figure. The member reference said in her question, its replacement cost is not the same as present value. It's not what it's worth, Mr. Speaker, going forward. Mr. Speaker, the Sask Housing Corporation works hard to ensure that units are brought back onto line. We've had several announcements. The member from Saskatoon Southeast just talked about more units coming online for those in seniors units, Mr. Speaker, those who are most vulnerable or need a place to stay, Mr. Speaker. We're working very hard to turn over units in the existing landscape, Mr. Speaker. We're increasing the number of units available, well over 300 that are being constructed as we speak, Mr. Speaker, and we're working hard to turn over those that where we need to get them to rent ready so people can use them, Mr. Speaker, and have that affordable units available to them.
Hear, hear.
Recognize a member from the John Alfredstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, if the minister has an issue with that $600 million figure, I invite him to find his feet and tell me how many hundreds of millions he thinks we're wasting on those empty units. Mr. Speaker, no one is struggling more today than seniors who have to survive on a fixed income, and they have been badly impacted by the Sask Party's housing cuts and failure to step in with cost of living relief. Today, we're joined by 3 seniors from the High Park Tower in Moose Jaw. They are here to share harrowing stories of their experience in Sask housing units. They feel abandoned by this government after their safe and affordable seniors' housing has become anything but. A lack of maintenance, cockroaches, long delays in basic repairs. In High Park Tower, they now lock the door and turn off the intercom at 8 p.m., leaving these folks feel like they're in, quote, jail, isolated and cut off from their loved ones. What does the minister have to say to the seniors who are being so badly failed by the Sask Party government?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of vacancies, we are working very hard to fill those through programs such as in North Central Regina having a fixed rate rent, and that is seeing some success, Mr. Speaker. We're looking to turn over units as quickly as we can. Sometimes there's challenges finding contractors to be able to bring those back online, Mr. Speaker. I know in Regina here there are seniors high-rises that do have vacancies, Mr. Speaker, and we want to continue to work on those in certain areas of the city of Regina to be able to fill those, Mr. Speaker. We do spend about well north of $70 million on maintenance and improvements to be able to bring units offline back to online, as well as continued maintenance, Mr. Speaker. It's a good option. Rent geared to income is very affordable in most of the units that we have. They're social housing units, and we want to continue to make those available, Mr. Speaker, in terms of keeping them up to date and keeping them safe and warm for people to be able to use them.
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize a member from the John Alfredstone Centre.
Wow, Mr. Speaker, don't take it from me, take it from these folks who have trekked here to their legislative assembly to share these concerns. Right. They report regularly finding needles in the stairway, people sleeping in the laundry room, regularly finding feces in the elevator, addiction and mental health episodes spilling out into common areas. They recognize all people deserve to be housed and supported, but this government is trying to address the many crises in housing of their creation by throwing everyone in without any help, without any thought, and without any support, Mr. Speaker, and it's not working. Seniors are moving out in large numbers, and the residents here don't feel safe or heard. Will the minister agree to meet with these seniors today and commit to fixing the problems in seniors' housing today? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
In terms of meeting with individuals, I'd be happy to listen to and address their concerns as we go forward, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we want to have a secure place. In many instances, there is security, and if needed, we have moved on putting security into buildings where there has been incidents and challenges in the past. So we can certainly look at that, Mr. Speaker. In terms of support for seniors, our government's been able to increase the seniors' income plan several times over our term in government, Mr. Speaker. We quadrupled it. The personal care home benefit has increased in this most recent budget. So, Mr. Speaker, we have a ministry just in charge of seniors to help in that situation. But we're going to continue to work to bring more units online. We have had some success in our major centres in terms of filling those vacant units, Mr. Speaker. Those are down in all of our 3 major centres. So we want to continue to find safe and affordable units for everyone, including our seniors.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, last week Statistics Canada released its latest numbers on intimate partner violence in the country. In 2022 in Saskatchewan, 7,200 people were victims of intimate partner violence. We're worst in the nation. Just like last year, just like the year before. That Sask Party government pats itself on the back for finally offering operational funding for second-stage shelters, the second last province in the country to do so, and after years of pushing from those on the front line and the opposition. What is the minister doing to actually bring down intimate partner violence rates in Saskatchewan?
Recognize Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To begin with, Mr. Speaker, last week we introduced the Protection from Human Trafficking Coerced Debts Amendment Act, which follows on acts along that line in previous years, Mr. Speaker, as part of an effort by government to get to the cause of this grave issue and address it. It is a complex one, Mr. Speaker, but $27.5 million is what this government has invested and is investing this year in addressing interpersonal violence in all aspects. That covers funding for sexual assault providers, counselors, transportation, second-stage housing is referenced on the capital side and on the operations side. In past months, we have announced efforts in that regard for the YWCA in Regina and the YWCA in Saskatoon, in PA, Mr. Speaker. All aspects are being addressed through the commitment by this government to